They are trying to downplay this letter that came out from Kelsey Plum and Breanna Stewart that makes the higher ups in the PA look absolutely awful in Terry Carmichael Jackson and Nneka Ogwumike. And with all of that being said, as they've continued to negotiate these past couple of days, they have stopped all public negotiations, okay? Details about the latest proposal never came out. The latest counter proposal from the WNBA to the WNBPA. It's not.
The business of professional sports is a ruthless, unforgiving machine. It does not run on hopes, dreams, or progressive social ideologies. It runs on capital, leverage, and the cold, unyielding reality of the free market. When you sit across the negotiating table from a circle of billionaire owners who literally control the survival of your sport, you must possess a brutally accurate understanding of your true market value. If you misjudge that value, if your ego, your bitterness, and your dangerous sense of entitlement blind you to the economic reality of your position, you do not merely lose the negotiation, you risk burning the entire industry to the ground. Today is March 10, 2026. 4 months, the Women's National Basketball Association Players Association has been playing a high-stakes, extraordinarily dangerous game of corporate chicken with the NBA establishment. They demanded structurally impossible revenue splits. They demanded fully guaranteed maximum contracts. They demanded free housing. They held press conferences, weaponized social media, and openly threatened to set the upcoming season on fire if their aggressive demands were not satisfied. Their entire labor strategy was built on the reckless assumption that the billionaire owners would eventually panic, surrender to the pressure, and simply hand over the keys to the kingdom. The owners did not panic. The owners did not surrender. The owners calmly called their bluff. The drop-dead deadline imposed by Adam Silver has now officially arrived. The clock has hit zero. There is no collective bargaining agreement. There is no term sheet. There is no last-minute compromise. And as a direct consequence of what may become the most spectacular ego-driven corporate failure in the history of women's sports, the 2026 Women's National Basketball Association season is now hanging by a thread, and Caitlin Clark has effectively been locked out of her own league. If you believe this massive structural collapse is merely a routine labor dispute over fractional revenue percentages, then you are falling straight into the ultimate media smokescreen. This is not about fair wages for the working-class player. This is a bitter, toxic power struggle. It is a calculated and coordinated sabotage of the so-called Caitlin Clark economy by a militant faction of veteran players who would rather watch the entire league burn to ashes than surrender their cultural control to a 24-year-old point guard. Now let us dissect the wreckage inside the Women's National Basketball Players Association. For the past year, mainstream sports media has aggressively pushed a sanitized and carefully curated narrative. They wanted the public to believe that the WNBA was a unified and impenetrable sisterhood of labor warriors. They wanted you to look at Union President Nneka Ogwumike and Executive Director Terry Carmichael Jackson and see fearless strategists leading a noble crusade against corporate greed. But behind closed doors, the reality was far darker. The union was quietly rotting from the inside out, and the image of unity they presented to the world was nothing more than a carefully manufactured illusion.
Okay, here it says the league said that Tuesday, March 10th, is the date a term sheet for a new CBA must be completed in order to avoid a delay in the start of the 2026 season, which is scheduled to tip off May 8th. There's been movement from both sides as the deadline approached, as the WNBA and WNBPA swapped counter proposals over the weekend. But as of Tuesday morning, there's no deal. There's no deal, y'all. Like, let's just be clear. There's no deal. Nothing is.
Listen closely to the complete collapse of transparency. The union leadership became so incompetent, so dangerously detached from the reality of the negotiations, that even their own vice presidents, superstars Kelsey Plum and Breanna Stewart, were forced to leak a multi-page letter to ESPN simply to expose the truth that the players themselves were being kept completely in the dark. The executive committee had not even seen a real economic proposal until January. In any rational, functional corporate environment, If a union director hides term sheets from their own executive board while publicly steering the entire workforce toward a catastrophic strike, that individual would be removed immediately for gross malpractice. But inside the insulated and toxic echo chamber of the Women's National Basketball Association, the leadership simply stopped communicating with the public, locked the doors, and kept driving the entire organization straight toward disaster. By eliminating all public details of the negotiations, the union leadership managed to shield themselves from the intense and justified outrage of their own rank-and-file members. The middle-tier players, the women earning roughly $80,000 a year who genuinely rely on these paychecks to survive, were effectively silenced. They were forced to sit helplessly on the sidelines and watch their financial futures being gambled away by wealthy veterans who had already secured millions through overseas contracts and endorsement deals. And now the deadline has finally arrived, and the bill is officially due. There is no deal. Nothing has been finalized. Let the sheer magnitude of that failure truly sink in. The Women's National Basketball Association was sitting on what could have been the greatest financial opportunity in the entire history of women's athletics. They had just secured a newly minted media rights agreement worth more than $2 billion. Arenas across the country were selling out. Corporate sponsorships were surging at unprecedented levels. The global sports economy had finally turned its full attention toward the league. All they had to do was behave like rational business partners, secure the massive and historic pay raises that the owners were already prepared to offer, and simply step onto the court. Instead, the opportunity slipped through their fingers. The March 10th deadline passed without a deal, instantly throwing the entire league into a full-scale existential crisis. The May 8th tip-off date is now hanging in uncertainty. The draft is suddenly in jeopardy. Free agency has frozen in place. Two brand-new expansion franchises cannot even build their rosters or properly market their teams because the entire economic framework of the league has collapsed into confusion. The union leadership believed they held the ultimate leverage. They believed they could hold the 2026 season hostage. But they made a fatal miscalculation about who actually holds the power. The league's owners are billionaires, backed by the enormous financial empire of the National Basketball Association. For 25 years, they have absorbed the WNBA's financial losses without hesitation. If the 2026 season disappears, the owners simply lock the gymnasium doors, stop paying salaries, write the temporary losses off against their corporate taxes, and shift their attention toward the NBA playoffs. The players, however, do not have that luxury. More than 80% of the league's workforce is currently unemployed, waiting to sign contracts under a new collective bargaining agreement that still does not exist. The working-class players now face the very real threat of financial collapse because their union leadership refused to face economic reality. And why did they refuse to accept that reality? Why did the militant veterans push these negotiations beyond the breaking point? Because they are fighting an ideological war against their own golden goose, Caitlin Clark.
27th submission, WNBA Executive Committee, Kelsey Plum said the league's offer marked a significant win amid negotiations. Okay, and she said it was a win, but you have people in the WNBA slamming the offer, which is why we all knew that they weren't on the same page, and they just keep confirming it the more they speak publicly. Okay, they are not on the same page. They are not aligned. They are not all in agreement. Okay,
one voice inside the union reportedly looked at the proposal and openly stated that the league's offer represented a significant victory. She examined the massive financial increases sitting on the table and tried to declare the moment for what it was, a win. The message was simple: take the money and play basketball. But the militant faction inside the union slammed the offer shut. They refused to accept the victory. They refused to move forward together. And that forces a very dark, deeply uncomfortable question into the open. Why would a group of professional athletes deliberately sabotage the most lucrative financial offer in the history of their own sport? Why reject a deal promising unprecedented wealth, better travel conditions, and long-term financial stability? According to the explosive theory many commentators whisper about, but that mainstream outlets are hesitant to fully confront, the answer is brutally simple. The militant veterans are willing to push the 2026 season toward destruction because it may be the last weapon they believe they have to slow the unstoppable momentum of Caitlin Clark within the Women's National Basketball Association. Everybody is trying to capitalize. Everybody wants a piece of the momentum. They are trying to eat off the rise of Caitlin Clark, and in the middle of this storm, she may ultimately be the one who suffers the most. This is the brutal and toxic psychology of the old guard. For decades, they ruled over a small, unprofitable, culturally insulated kingdom. They controlled the narratives, dictated the expectations, and demanded unquestioned deference from every rookie who entered the league. They dominated the entire ecosystem of women's basketball. Then Caitlin Clark arrived from Iowa Hawkeyes women's basketball and everything changed. She shattered viewership records across the sport. She pulled millions of brand new fans into the orbit of the Women's National Basketball Association, fans who did not care about the unwritten rules of the veteran establishment. She secured multi-million-dollar endorsement deals and instantly shifted the cultural and economic center of gravity in women's basketball. To a mainstream sports audience, the old guard suddenly looked irrelevant. Many veteran leaders deeply resent this transformation. They resent the reality that they spent 20 years building the foundation, only to watch a 22-year-old rookie walk in and effectively purchase the entire house in her very first season. By pushing negotiations past the March 10th deadline and flirting with a lockout, the militant veterans appear to be executing a scorched earth strategy. They seem willing to risk a catastrophic financial collapse, threaten the $2 billion media momentum, and jeopardize the livelihoods of their own union members simply to prove they still control the levers of power. In that mindset, ruling over the ashes of a canceled season feels preferable to accepting a historic pay raise in a league where Caitlin Clark has become the undisputed main attraction. The goal, critics argue, is to steal a year of Clark's athletic prime, quiet the noise around her meteoric rise, and punish the wave of new fans who did not automatically bow to the legacy stars. But strategies driven by resentment and ego rarely end well, and this one may be on the verge of backfiring in the most devastating way imaginable.
And then from there went to 26, like 1.5%. Like it's been ridiculous, and everybody's trying to capitalize. They're trying to eat off of Caitlin Clark and the same fans that they attempted to push away, but they want to eat off of them. They want to make all of this money. You got vets who want to make their last coin on their way out. Okay, as Angel McCoughtry said, and that's just what it is. And unfortunately,
the union leadership now appears to be operating without any real accountability. They accuse the league of trying to divide the players, while ignoring the uncomfortable truth that their own vice presidents were the ones leaking letters that exposed the internal dysfunction. Anonymous players reportedly begged the leadership not to push toward a strike because they simply could not afford a lockout, but those warnings were brushed aside. The economic realities of the free market were ignored, and now the consequences are approaching fast. Adam Silver and the league's owners appear ready to drop the hammer. Backed by the financial power of the National Basketball Association, the ownership group seems unlikely to concede even a fractional inch to what they view as a radical negotiating strategy. Instead, they may present a final, uncompromising term sheet, one loaded with strict exclusivity clauses and tighter control over players' off-season activities in an effort to prevent another labor disaster. If the union refuses to sign, the owners could simply allow the entire 2026 season of the Women's National Basketball Association to collapse. And if that happens, what becomes of Caitlin Clark? In many ways, very little changes for her personally. She would still be playing basketball on major international stages, still commanding enormous global attention, and still drawing massive television audiences. Her commercial empire would remain intact, with major endorsement deals from brands like Nike and Gatorade continuing to deliver multi-year, multi-million-dollar payouts. Even in the middle of league chaos, she would likely remain the most recognizable and marketable face of the sport.
But the fact of the matter is, you guys weren't communicating well enough. You weren't getting people the proper information. You weren't getting people who are board members the information that they were requesting. You ignored the fact that you had a bunch of players saying they can't afford a lockout. There was players who went in an ESPN interview anonymously and said that they felt the WNBPA was being greedy and selfish. So I don't know how you just blame the league for this and take no accountability as the higher up.
Completely insulated and protected from the financial chaos of a potential lockout, Caitlin Clark would remain one of the few figures in women's basketball untouched by the devastation. The reality is that the Women's National Basketball Association now needs Caitlin Clark in an almost existential way just to maintain its momentum and visibility. Clark, on the other hand, does not depend on the league for her relevance or financial security. Critics argue that the militant veterans attempted to play a dangerous game of high-stakes corporate chess with a once-in-a-generation superstar, only to discover, publicly, that they had shattered their own board. They gambled what could have been the most historic season in WNBA history on a risky bluff, and according to that narrative, the bluff was called by Adam Silver. Now the question shifts to the fans. Is the 2026 WNBA season effectively dead because veteran players refuse to accept what some believe was a massive financial victory? Are internal rivalries and resentment toward Caitlin Clark's meteoric rise tearing the league apart? And if a lockout ultimately wipes out a year of Clark's career, would fans still be willing to return and support the league afterward? Those are the questions dominating the conversation around the WNBA right now. Supporters of the league see this as a critical turning point, one that will determine whether women's professional basketball continues building on its surge in popularity or risks losing the momentum it worked decades to create.